Stronghold in space. The Outer Planetary Spacefleet, commanded by Jovial Jawab of Jupiter, was zooming in for its conquest of the Interplanetary group. A very minor war in terms of the universe, but the inhabitants of many galaxies were watching to see what would happen in our solar system. Should the mighty outer planets achieve their conquest, the universe would no longer be safe for small worlds. People's interest focused on the mess around old solar was pretty bad, no matter how you considered it. Recognizing the emergency, the inner planets had banded to resist the aggressors. Mercury, Venus, Earth and Mars were ready, and Luna, the only sizable moon in their group, had added its strength to that of E, the popular name for Earth. All this was a great laugh to the Jawab of Jupiter and his lieutenants. The Surrey of Saturn, the Univac of Uranus, the Nimbus of Neptune and the Pediculum of Pluto. In his edict to E and other inner planets, the Jawab declared, "Our mighty fleets can wither your worlds one by one. Then we can revive those dead worlds with life transported from our own mighty planets. But it will be easier for us to graft life from our worlds with some that exists on yours. Capitulation will therefore prove to your advantage." In their customarily stupid style, the inner planets refused to accept this ultimatum. So the Outer Planetary Spacefleet furnished a few demonstrations, wiping out a lot of obsolete spacecraft just to show what it would do to the Interplanetary Squadron when they met. Then the Outer Planetary Spacefleet headed in for the kill. Now on the Loeb's own flagship, a report was received regarding a stronghold that the Interplanetarians had set up as a last stupid resort. "Our space spies have pinpointed the asteroid Eros," the report stated. "It is a stupid little world, puny even when compared to insignificant planets like Mars, whose orbit it crosses. It is only about 50 miles around, but it is not even spherical in shape. It is just a chunk of irregular rock and metal side-slipping into space." When he heard this report, the Jawab became jovial indeed. "And what," he inquired, "have the Interplanetarians done with this silly world, may I ask?" "They have fortified it," the robot reporter replied, "and garrisoned it with shock troops from all the larger members of their system: Mercury, Venus, E, Luna and Mars. May I also ask," added the Jawab, "what we should do about it?" "Bypass it, just," and Jovial Jawab recorded the robot. "You can return and mop it up later, if it has not surrendered after what its garrison sees happen to the bigger worlds." The Jovial Jawab shook his shaggy head. "You robots will never learn," he told the recording machine. "We shall attack this puny planet Eros and make a test case. Not only will the Interplanetarians see how quickly, how capably we can destroy, they will all see some of their own creatures go to doom. The threatened worlds will then surrender." So the Grand Outer Planetary Spacefleet went a few million miles out of its way to take a crack at the puny planet Eros. One day when it was morning on one crag of Eros, noon on another and sunset on a third, the defenders of those jutting pinnacles wigwagged to each other that the invaders had arrived. Promptly, all defenders ducked into the caverns of Eros. It was well they did. Surrounding Eros from all sides, the 23,228 spaceships that made up the Outer Planetary Fleet gave it a thorough flame treatment. The blasts from the flamejets literally bathed the tiny world with a white heat, until it glowed with a vigor that rivaled the sun's. Everything metallic on Eros was melted by the flames. Iron poured from its ore and flowed all over the surface. In the bedrock of the tiny world's core, the defenders were safe from the devastating heat. But by the time they could come from that refuge, the battle would be lost. Even spacesuits could do no good, nor robots. The metal in such devices would by this time have been melted. So, while the flames still gorged, 1,000 of the Jawa spaceships drove straight for the planet, expecting to land the moment that the fire faded. Then, to their amazement, creatures like human salamanders arose from the flames themselves. With wild, tribal shrieks, these barbarous defenders let loose with flame jets of their own that knocked out the attackers. Here, on Eros, were creatures that thrived on fire itself. With 1,000 of his ships eradicated, the Jawab became furious. Then, let go with the hydrogen and oxygen tubes, the Jawab ordered. A ratio of 2 to 1. We shall form that universal solvent called water and let it quench the flames and drown the flame dwellers with it. Clouds of gas issued from 1,000,000 jets. The surface of Eros was shrouded in a mist that turned to a mighty tide that swept the jagged planet, so that only the tiniest peaks remained in sight. Then, as the waters subsided, another 1,000 of the invading spaceships zoomed to the attack. As the ships landed, out of the water came great brawny men who lashed about like porpoises. They grabbed the members of the landing party by their necks, thrust them down into the water and drowned them. Never had any hand-to-hand conflict proven so one-sided. Madly, the Jawab ordered great suction devices to be put in action. In clouds, the waters were drawn up from the surface of Eros. The defenders disappeared below, making for the planet's interior. Keep the pumps working, Gull stormed the Jawab. We shall utterly dehydrate the surface of Eros until nothing remotely human could hope to live there. Within mere hours the dehydration was complete. The surface of Eros was obscured by a dust, the sort that could be found only on the driest deserts. The Jawab sent landing parties and another 1,000 spaceships. From the dust sprang ruddy fighters, brawny men who threw back this new attack. Somehow, the defenders of Eros could stand off dehydration too. The Jawab had an answer for that. They obscured the surface of Eros from sight in wave of clouds that changed from purple, green, to pink. Every poison gas known to civilized creatures was let loose on the stronghold that still sped through space. Again, the Jawab's invaders were repulsed by a motley mob of long-legged, big-headed, six-armed creatures that looked more like tarantulas than men, but didn't mind poison gases in the least. The Jawab had one final weapon. He blasted the tiny world with great clouds of liquid air, cutting its temperature down to a point where even robots could not function because their metal joints would freeze and break. Then, upon the frozen surface of Eros, the Jawab sent a horde of fighters from the planet Pluto, where life is accustomed to a temperature only slightly above absolute zero. The Plutonians were met by a surging mob as tough as themselves. Invaders who sprang from icy foxholes and let the enemy have it with every available type of weapon. Then, before the Jawab could recover from this new setback, a fleet showed up from the inner planets and knocked the outer planetarians all apart. Only when the Jovial Jawab was captured and taken as a prisoner low Earth did he learn all that had happened. Admiral Glex of the Earthian fleet explained it. To meet your flamejets, stated Glex, we used fighters from the side of Mercury that always faces the sun. Those people live among fields of molten metal, so why should fire bother them? Our amphibian men came from the planet Venus, where rains form a constant deluge. The water treatment was made to their order. When you dehydrated Eros, Glex continued, the Martians took over. Their planet is practically a desert, so they were right at home. Poison gases could not bother the fighters from our moon, Luna, because they have learned to live without air. They just don't breathe anything. As for the final fray, concluded Glex, the side of Mercury that is away from the sun is probably the coldest place in the solar system. So we had some boys from there, all set to knock off your Plutonians. Jack-Sarka of Jupiter looked bitterly at Glex of E. Then the Jawab's big voice boomed, you Earthians, take credit for the victory, but I can't see how you played any part in it. We thought it up, returned Glex, with a bread smile. Then we just sat back and let nature take its course. After all, that's a simple way of doing things right, as you found out.
The end.
Ho ho ho!